got the right camera chosen now. Okay, we're up and live. I'm going to use a little card table. Set this up a bit now. And that. Come for walkies.
Oh, maybe we put the tickets in there. That
There we go. We've got Joycey on the camera.
got me on camera.
Yeah, got you on camera. I'm going to turn it around to Harvey. There we go. We've got the camera on and we're live.
The pin in my mouth.
Which chairs did you want? The blue ones?
Oh, I'm going to do this on the table.
Do you want the first row sort of level with the two poles? First row of chairs, or is that going to be G5s? Do you want it back a bit?
That's it. No, that's right.
That's all right?
Sorry, I'll sit up in a minute. I'm just going to get this up here.
Yeah, you can get that up and I'll do this bit. We've got another half an hour or 15 minutes, I suppose.
Oh, there's one with Charlie's head on.
Oh, really? Yeah, already?
Yeah,
I suppose it's been 2 years.
Two years too long. Did you look at the Charlie's head?
I haven't in the socket with.
I don't know it. I will give it to you. Don't you mind on Charlie?
I go on to that faults, maybe. I do like them, but I think we will be great doing. Very disappointed in Prince Harry. Very disappointed. I don't know what else he's been kicked out of, but he's officially out of the Wheel of Time community.
Yeah, that's
We all took a vote and said no, he wasn't allowed to be a member. He's the only member who had been kicked out.
Yes, yes.
We had a bailiff for a job. I don't know what was worth that way to someone covering his short for a match or and couldn't say he was filling in for him for security reasons. She's that piece of shit schedule. 3 days and then we saw it. But then you it's a really good shot then it's following. Your phone's going, Joyce. Do you want me to grab it?
Oh my goodness. No, you won't grab it.
I can bring it into you.
Oh no, just leave it.
Just leave it.
If they want me, they'll leave a message.
They will. Oh, you got all the tickets in a little basket. That's
Oh.
cute.
I thought that was a good idea, didn't you?
Yeah, that's cute. Okay, how's this looking? Good.
Better start folding them up because it will take a little while.
I thought they would start turning up by now. 4:45.
The people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have some more. Yeah, she's figuring some money in there. You think if I hang up, I'll ring that. I'll leave a message.
They know I'm not too far away. I got rid of long heavy change out of my pocket. You didn't find that, Harvey?
Sorry.
Did you find that? You get a lot of heavy change in your pocket?
From time to time, yes. And then I try and find ways of getting rid of it. Surprising people with commodity.
So Richard says, you know, got too much shrapnel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I deliberately force businesses to accept cash.
Yeah, that's right.
But,
Yeah, they've got out of the habit of it.
that's my
Haven't
life's
they? 6
work.
years.
They keep cash in circulation.
And the poor little young things in the supermarket, they don't know how to give change. You give them it a note, and oh, okay, I've got to work out what to give you back.
Those are all for them on the screen.
Yeah, the
I
machine,
know, you
machine
sure do, yeah. Then they got to work out the coins and that to give it to you. You know what I mean? Even though it comes
That
up,
comes down to not playing enough Monopoly.
yeah, that's what it is. So,
I'll blame that.
okay, I'll leave the raffle in your hands, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Okay.
So what's the raffle?
The Easter egg raffle. So every year we have a raffle. And we've got some lovely Easter eggs that have been donated. Bunnies and little eggs and big eggs, and
Okay.
it's $2 for a ticket for memory or 3 for $5. And it will be drawn Friday. It comes out the change again.
It comes out of my shrapnel.
I love it all on board.
How many for $5?
5.
$5 for $5.
They're 3 for $5.
3 for $5.
Yes. $2 each or 3 for $5.
You kept it, or I put it in
The money jar is here. And you can write yourself a ticket.
We check the other parts.
You can get one part, yes, and then I'll hope people turn up.
Morning.
Morning. Love your talk.
Oh, thank you. How do you end, Harvey? Well, that's, I don't know if you want to do that.
Oh, okay.
And then I've done this.
Oh, good. Some ideas.
Yeah, so I'll tell Harvey that
Yep.
too. You want to,
And Bob's coming down. Bob's going to do the next one.
what?
Bob's going to do his next one. He's talk on the drought in the wars.
Well, he'll have to wait because we've organised the 2 people from,
Yeah, and he's doing it the next
well,
one.
they'll be June.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you've got April twice on here.
Oh, have I?
Yeah.
Oh,
It'll be May.
that's just for you.
Yes, yeah, it'll be May. And then Bob's going to do June.
Yeah,
And then we need to start thinking
Yes,
about the next
yes.
6 months.
so,
I don't try to trick the system by using good books.
yes, well, doesn't always work.
No, that doesn't make any good.
If between you and Trish, if you just tell people that we need some ideas, and so we'll put it on one of those boards, Trish.
Yes.
And just, that's because there'll be so many suggestions. I did 2 sheets.
I haven't got time to look at suggestions.
No, I'm just, if we
Oh,
just
that's
mention
just-
it,
yeah.
mention it, and we'll put it.
Yeah.
We'll just pop it on there. You know, I'm not suggesting the suggestions, but just tell them all, you know, if it's gonna
So-
go on.
I can still do another one.
Yes,
If you've got April, May and June to that,
Yes.
I won't be available for the September.
Yes, yeah, no, well, that's all right.
September's fine.
Yeah, we should.
Good morning.
That's what, July, August, yeah, that'll do all right. I think we. And good morning. Yes, actually, this chap who was a wool buyer,
Ah,
he could be lined up for local history.
Lots of dates and be very interesting.
But I'll leave you all with it. Thanks, Trish.
working.
Oops.
I'll turn around. How long has it been since we did a live, Harvey? I can't remember. Would have been November.
Well, the one you did with me. October or November, I can't remember.
I think our
Towards the end of the year.
last local history would have been in November.
Yeah.
Morning.
Yeah, is the water okay, right to go?
Yes.
The covers?
Yep.
Because I usually have a five
Oh,
to 10.
yep. The water's fine because it's an insta heat.
Yep.
Thing out there. So you push the button in at the back and then pull the handle down
Right.
on the red tap. The red tap's for hot and the blue tap's for cold.
Right. Sounds complicated, but
It's really good.
It's not me going places.
we are. Yeah. Thankfully, not.
Oh, you
like,
didn't.
You have to do it.
All on both sides. Good morning.
Hi, Judy.
Morning.
I'm good, thanks. On this magnificent morning.
Summer's almost heavy.
I know, but it's just beautiful days for mornings. It just no
Unlike
breeze,
autumn.
nothing. They're just gorgeous. I mean, it's so good.
Yes.
Hi. Yes. In the hope that there'll be more, I'll put out a couple of minutes.
Oh. Does that make them come?
We hope.
I don't think that rule apply.
Hmm.
What was your last session? In February, local scheme.
We had Bill
There was a Snowy Mountains with a
Yeah.
scan.
Oh, yeah.
and the Melbourne one.
Yes, we looked at, Tony Robinson did a walk through Melbourne, through Carlton, I think it was. He went through the Carlton Gardens and there was, a restaurant where, someone had taken the people inside the restaurant hostage and he wanted to talk to his mum. So she came down there in a nighty dressing gown and split it and hit him over the head with a handbag. That was funny.
Because when you're visiting places, those guided walks are really terrific value because they take you to places that you never would have thought of and explain what's happening. So,
Well, we all learned something with that one, I think.
Yeah. Don't call mum if you're in trouble. Do you ever watch, there's a lady called Jay Draper and she does walking tours around London. And they're really good. Mm.
People coming.
Minutes to go.
Straight anybody. It's the right place, right place to live. No, not just a station.
Oh, okay.
Well, to just the ocean, yeah.
This day I'd say we can't end it way too soon.
It's ending soon.
Yes, it's not too far away.
It's in the newsletter, but now I can't remember when it was.
The seventh.
7th. So it's only just after Easter.
Yes, it will be.
So a couple of more weeks.
Find it tiring, do you? Do you find it pretty tiring?
Oh, I do now.
Just, yeah.
Yeah, almost as stir crazy.
It's a like,
Do we need the air conditioner on or are we right? You're right? Another minute or so I think we've got.
well, Rhonda's here somewhere.
Rhonda will be down the back with writing for fun.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, pretty much everyone.
No.
We all had a good month?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, it's 10 o'clock, so I'll officially welcome everyone to today's local history. Well, this is the first time we've live streamed for a long time, so I think November would have been the last time we set up the equipment, so it didn't want to work very well this morning. It was half asleep, but it seems to be up and working now. We have 2 people on watching, so that's good. Might be all we get, but yeah, welcome to those at home. Yeah, so I'll pass over to Harvey. I don't think he needs any introduction at all. He's set up. You've been here before. Thank you, Harvey.
many times. Although I can't remember, but very good. So, what is the local history this morning? So, I'm just an occasional tutor now, I suppose you'd say. And as you know, your sessions are being sort of organised almost on a month-by-month basis.
Yep.
I'll be a bit better than that. So Rhonda has put up this under course information where she'd like any ideas for things you would like as like the district topics, suggestions, or you might do a session yourself. So you might think about that. And there are raffle tickets available over here. That huge basket of Easter eggs over there. That's going to be drawn Friday.
It's drawn Friday.
So get in while you can.
Yeah.
And
There's 5 prizes.
so
5 prizes.
5 prizes. Good. We can't miss it out, can we? So I actually don't know all of you. So we might just have a very quick run around, starting up here, please.
Hi, Rob Pollock.
Oh yes, Rob. Thanks, welcome. That's it. You've probably been with history longer than you care to remember.
Oh, not that long.
Don't think of that. You're really good. Without my name tag, sorry, radio.
Judy Hazelden,
Kevin Dunn.
Margaret Dunn.
Okay, three.
So welcome everyone. Because I'm a new Italian, but you should welcome everyone. So our topic this morning is the gold escort. And the first question is probably going to be, what's that got to do with local history? So it has more than just a marginal relevance to the Wimmera, because the Wimmera was one of the prime areas that the gold escort from Adelaide, Mount Alexander and back, passed through. But I'm probably jumping around a little bit here because we need to just ascertain right at the very start what was the gold escort. So I'll always have a cop sheet, so we'll work from that a little bit. And anyway, welcome. Yes.
Sorry, I'm not on the care. Sometimes things don't go right.
That's not. So rather than giving you a lot of notes, although I have learned a little bit, I've actually set out a series of questions for us to cover during the day. And I hope we'll have questions or discussion or comments. And you may have some special knowledge about the gold escort that the group would find useful. So that would be good as well. But what I'll get you to do first, and this is really just to set the scene. So on the back of that sheet is just a very general introduction to what the gold escort was. So what I'll get you to do is just read that to this. And that will already answer a few of the questions we'll be dealing with, but we'll go into a lot more detail than that.
What kind of values at the time or even today?
Well, they're expressing values of the time. So 1.2 million pounds would be an absolute fortune today. I probably should have worked out the equivalent values that if we realise that it saved South Australia's economy from bankruptcy and saved and that the government actually had money to spend in South Australia, that probably gives you an indication of its value at the time. Later on in the session, we'll look at some of the comparative values of what went to Adelaide compared to the total amount that left the BDO Mount Alexander goldfields. It was something like about 1/5 of the total value that went to Adelaide. So that was pretty substantial. Yeah.
Was Adelaide was like that until Broken Hill started?
So
Until Broken Hill started and that saved Adelaide, South Australia.
yes, Broken Hills. It
It was, but that's what saved. Oh, they had lots of copper mines,
Yes.
but it was Broken Hill that saved South Australia.
Yeah.
How to guess how much that works out to?
Tell us, please.
217 million. Oh,
They're going to be more than that, because it's still the same good idea. And I mean, government budgets and economies in those days were just nothing like they are today. So it would have been a incredibly substantial amount. Because of course governments in those days just didn't do all the stuff that the governments do these days. So anyway, that gives you a bit of a start in terms of what the Escort was. So for us, it probably answers the first question: what was the old Escort and why? And that comes on with question 2: what were their reasons? So with all the finds in gold, of course, you probably all remember that the initial gold finds in Australia were in New South Wales. In 1951, I think it was. Yes. But by the end of 1851, there had been substantial amounts of gold found in Victoria. And as it turned out, the Victorian fields were far more valuable than New South Wales ones, at least in that initial gold rush period. So as you could say, it was from 1851 to 1855. And from then on, gold increasingly became a deep shaft proposition. And it meant that a lot of miners formed themselves into little companies that gathered the gold that way. And that went roughly from 1855 through to 1860. That's a bit later than that as well. And some of the gold mines actually continued on for decades. But by then they had formed into substantial companies that had a good financial backing to do it. So with all the gold finds in Victoria, and initially you had ones at places like Mount Alexander, following fairly quickly on on that was finds in Bendigo, Castlemaine, so on. And I should explain too, I know we tend to think that Castlemaine and Mount Alexander is the same place, but they are not. And they're actually quite separated in the gold rush era. But when I was a kid, when I was younger, I used to think, where did Mount Alexander Road in Melbourne come from? You know, there's this very important road. It's not that important now, but very important road going out northwestern Melbourne called Mount Alexander Road. Where did that name ever come? Of course, it came from the gold rushes. because it was the main road out of Melbourne to Mount Alexander Goldfield. So that was the name that stuck in the minds of all the diggers, the miners who set off in pursuit of wealth. And it wasn't all that long after that, but of course the Ballarat mines came online as well. And as well as that, of course, a whole lot of places in between. The Molly, Creswick, and, well, we could go a lot, probably a dozen names of smaller places that we thought during the gold rush. Okay, so a lot of South Australians, of course, were heading off to the Victorian diggings. So not only was South Australia losing money, but they were losing population as well. And that was a real issue for them. How did they arrest this sort of exodus of people out of Adelaide and out of South Australia? So, of course, that's where this idea of we might be able to attract the gold to be brought over to South Australia. And if we can instigate that and it works, it will save our economy. And in fact, we did actually achieve that. So this came up a little bit later in our discussion too, but the plan essentially was that a gold cart under escort, so the mounted police escort, would travel all the way from Adelaide to Mount Alexander, and their main purpose was to seek out the gold that had been obtained by South Australian diggers. They weren't really aiming themselves at the main, all the diggers on those goldfields. They were aiming at the South Australian diggers because they thought that would have more appeal to those people that come from South Australia to actually help to influence a good outcome for South Australia, or for Adelaide in particular, but for South Australia. So that was their appeal to them. And initially that was their main sort of target market, if you like. But later on, they weren't afraid to take some of the gold obtained by the Victorian diggers as well, if that helped to boost the amount of gold that could be transported to Adelaide. Now, this may be a question you have, when we deal with this later, but other escorts were set up as well. And there was an escort that went from these Indians to Melbourne as well. And they were organised in very similar ways. They had a wagon or a cart description. They had mounted troopers and they just went straight into Melbourne. Now, of course, the advantage for diggers who sent their gold to Melbourne would be
Speed.
sorry,
Speed.
the time it takes to get there. Because the sooner your gold arrives at its destination and gets registered and converted to value, to some value, the sooner you as the digger get a return. So what did South Australia do to entice the gold to Adelaide?
Offered them more.
And
More value.
yes, and that's exactly what they did. They offered a higher price per ounce for the gold. I think these are just off the top of my head figures, and these did change a little bit. But I think at one point in Melbourne you get £3, £10 shillings for an ounce of gold delivered to Melbourne. Adelaide was offering £3.17. This doesn't sound a huge difference, but if you have found a reasonable amount of gold, that would make a difference. So that was part of the incentive to get people to send it to Adelaide, particularly the South Australian. Now, some of these things change over time, and later on as we get through this, we'll see what some of those changes were and how it actually affected the operation of the gold Escort system. And sorry, I should have asked, can everybody hear this okay?
Yes.
I'm only using
Yes, I do.
I'm not getting started,
That would be better.
which I hope doesn't upset. That might be a bit better. It is. Yes. Yep. The other thing I should have mentioned, and this is my custom from way back, usually about 11, I have a 5-minute break, which ends up being a 10-minute break. If anyone wants to grab a cuppa or anything like that. Okay, so who initiated the Escort system? How was it organised? Now, there's a bit about this, of course, in the notes that you just read before. So who was the initiator of the system?
I'm sure. Sandy Tolmer.
Exactly, yes.
But did he initiate it? Wouldn't it have been someone in the government that offered this extra money to entice the rollover? He was just the organiser of the Escort and the suggester.
Well, I guess he's a play on words here a little bit, but he was the initiator. Yes, it was his idea, and he actually suggested it to the government. So he had to put a case to the government that this could work.
Do we know if that's before the Melbourne one or not?
Look, I'm not sure.
Because it wouldn't be a maybe totally fresh idea if there was already one happening somewhere.
Yeah. Look, I think you're probably right. I think by early 1852, there probably was at least something going to Melbourne. It may not have been as organised as it eventually became, because later on during 1852 and 53, later, the Melbourne Escort was going down every week because the distance of course. So they could do it much more quickly. But what was novel, of course, about Tolmer's plan, as he suggested to the government, was that, okay, the distance is relatively huge. How can that possibly be made to pay? But if it meant that a lot of gold was ending up in South Australia, that was to their benefit. And, well, everything, of course, you've got to see it, it'll work against the cost as well.
So they sold, South Australia sold it on at a higher price. That's how it advantaged them.
Yes, so I'll get to that more later, sorry. But, sorry, was there another question?
I just said some of it was, but not all of it.
Yes, yeah. A bit further down, we'll talk about the actual process of how all this worked, because it's a little bit more complicated than just saying the gold went to Adelaide, because something had to be done with it once it got there. But anyway, Tolmer was able to sell his idea to the South Australian government. There were some skeptics, as you could imagine, and it took a while for them to take up the idea, but eventually they agreed that, okay, it's worth trying, because there was a financial commitment to make this work. One of the ironies of all this was that at about this time, Palmer, as Chief Commissioner of Police, was ordered to cut the police budget in South Australia. So he was proposing a plan that was actually going to increase the police budget. But anyway, they did finally decide, well, it would be worth a try. And Palmer was given the responsibility of setting the whole thing up. So essentially, it was going to be they'd have a cart or wagon. Some of the books describe this in different ways, but I think a cart, which would be a two-wheel horse-drawn vehicle rather than a wagon, which is a four-wheeled vehicle. A cart would have been more practical, I suppose.
That meant it moved quicker in that time.
It probably did. It was probably easier for the horses to pull, especially given some of the conditions. They had to pull it along, and we'll get to that shortly. So he had to organise how they would do it, how many police would be required for it, and the number did vary a little bit, but it was usually about 10 or 11, or sometimes 12 troopers. So these were special mounted troopers of the South Australian Police. So I don't know whether they did this right at the start, but later on they actually initiated a special force, I suppose we would call it, within the South Australian Police, whose job was to be part of the gold escort. That's what they did. And at one time they had something like about 40 or 50 troopers in this special group of escort police, even though they might only need a dozen on one trip. And you do sort of wonder about the economies of that too. But the other big expense would be, any thoughts? The horses, yeah. Because it was a long distance. They would need two or three regular changes of horses to be able to do it. I happened to be talking to someone about this yesterday, and his comment was, oh, they changed horses twice a day. I'm pretty sure they didn't have it. Because it just wouldn't have been practical. So initially they took extra horses with them as they went, but gradually as the system became a bit more sophisticated and developed, they actually had staging places where they would have horses left. And so
Makes more sense.
yeah, and I mean, when you think about it, this is what was done with other things like Cobb and Co coaches and all sorts of things. Probably a little bit later than this, but not much later. And ironically, the Cobb and Co coaches followed some of the same routes as the Gold Escort did. But horses would be the other main expense, because at any one time they might have to have 30, 40, 50 horses available, but they might have later on, they distributed them along the route so that they could change them over on a fairly regular basis. And apparently the attrition rate on horses was reasonably high, because pulling the cart was hard work. And of course, the long distances over difficult terrain made even the horses who just had a mounted trooper on them pretty hard for them as well. Are any of you into horses at all? You probably know a lot more about this than I do. There's some condition that affected the horses' backs trying to think of the name of it. And it's sort of being continually written that this condition could eventually develop. At the times when the Escort it went through a particularly difficult journey, and certainly it wasn't all easy going, that really affected the horses quite badly as well. And some of them often needed months of recuperation between some of the Escort runs. And some of the horses would just bolt and disappear into the bush, never to be seen again. So they lost a few horses that way as well. Okay, so I want to spend a bit of time on the route that was taken, because this is one of the critical things about the whole Escort situation. And it could have been a make or break situation for the Gold Escort from the very start, because if they didn't establish a reasonably reliable route fairly quickly, it was going to get harder and harder as they went along. One thing they did do was, about the time the first Escort was due to depart Adelaide, they actually sent a party of surveyors ahead to try and mark a route out for them. And that worked to a degree, especially in South Australia, where these surveyors found what they hoped would be the best way to go. And what actually happened during that first Escort was that Tolmer and his group went way past the surveyors and got to Mount Alexander and met the surveyors on the way back. And Tolmer, we'll talk a little bit about Tolmer later, because he was probably a little bit eccentric in some ways. An interesting character, anyway. And he just told the surveyors, you don't need to go any further, we've found the way. They weren't convinced, and they kept going. So, but they sort of more or less agreed on where it should go. So in the description on the back of the sheet, it suggested that the trip would take about 10 days to get from Adelaide to Mount Alexander. And I suppose if you think about the distance, I think we've got some figures there. Trying to find it. The grid is very small, but 360 mile, and how many? 479. Yeah. Okay, so if for argument's sake we say that it's roughly 600 kilometres for the trip, 10 days, 60 kilometres a day, yeah, that'd be about right. Do you think? Pulling a cart on rough roads or non-existing roads?
It's probably a good day.
Yeah.
And the trip isn't be going to get off the horses.
Okay, so I've done a couple of maps here. South Australia, Victoria's on the other side, in case you were wondering. So we'll, and I might need to do a bit of reference as we go along here. But what I've done with these maps, of course, you can see that this represents the South Australian coast. And of course, down here further, you've got Mount Gambier and so on. The double, I've put in, so I'll go back a step. I'm going to put in the route as we go, so you can actually see that. So what this is meant to represent is what's here now. Okay, so this is your Duke's Highway in South Australia, Western Highway in Victoria. The the dotted lines, the Murray River there. Lake Alexandrina would be picked. So they left Adelaide and would head down. I should point out, not in a direct line. You're familiar with the Adelaide Hills and so on. It's not rugged, but it is quite hilly, and they would have had to find their route through the hills. But we won't worry too much about that. So they came down to Wellington.
And there was a ferry at that time.
There was a ferry, yes. So even by the early 1850s, there was already a ferry operating at Wellington. And I'm sure some of you have used the Wellington ferry many times, have you? Few of you, yeah. Which of course is a 24-hour service now. You can go over at any time, but it wouldn't have been then. And you probably had to help with the job of getting the ferry to the other side of the river as well, I would imagine.
And by that time, they didn't have the lake stand. It was still salt water getting up through there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the same applies to the Wimmera River, which we'll come to in a moment. Not so much the salt, but other aspects of the river. So what they did mean sometimes, though, that the river may not be all that high because there was no regulation.
I lived at Manning for a little while on Murray River, and the history there said there were periods of time when you could walk across the Murray. It was just little holes of water. Yeah,
Yes.
that's what my grandparents told me.
Yeah.
And that, and then there were the times when it would be quite a lot of water up there, and there'd be sharks. Yes. Yes.
Right. There's another thing that I read about sharks.
They weren't white pointers, but the sea fish came up there. Dolphins as well, up here in the Aboriginal art.
Yeah. The impression I got, though, for the gold escort, most of the 18 escorts that they ran, was that they had to use the ferry at Wellington. And probably if you think about Murray River flows at the time, you're nearing the lake, so the level's probably going to be a bit higher anyway. But it was the obvious place to go because it was already established crossing point. So that's what they decided to do. Now, in the description, it says the route, it more or less followed the Duke's Highway. I hope you could pick up on my shorthand here. Actually, that's not right. Just realised. This is going to help it. Yeah. And that one up there is Champness. So the description says that it more or less replicates the Duke's Highway as we have it today, which I think is probably a little bit of an overstatement in some ways, because there's no place until you get to Bordertown where it actually meets where the Duke's Highway is now. So it actually followed this path through here with slight variations north or south, and it ended up over here. We'll get to this in a minute. We're going empty at the moment to Mount Alexander. But so that's sort of roughly the route. I won't try and be too specific with it. So what sort of conditions are they going to encounter through there?
They have quite a lot of sandy soil in places, and they have salt pans and that stone, lots of stone canal, anyway.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they encountered. I don't know whether South Australians ever used this term before, but the term they used at the time was the long desert.
It was called a desert until they found the right fertilizers.
Yeah, no, it was Mallee country, and not unlike the Mallee country that was developed out in the big desert, for example, Victoria and so on. And of course, some of these areas over here too were Mallee country that were developed later on. But anyway, it was a long stretch of not terribly accommodating terrain. It would be sandy, some of it would be stony. And because the other issue was going to be water. There had to be water for the horses and for themselves, of course. So in the very first escort trip, which Tolma led personally, it was a real issue. They had some luck in that they did find some springs. So, you know, they were able to record all these and use them in later trips. What they did later was actually sink wells in particular places. And this is just pure guesswork, but there might be one there, and so on. And some of these places actually were specifically named as particular places or wells or sources of water.
And out from Canalpin, my dad family's down there, and we went and had a look at a well that was part of the old group. Yeah.
So out from Canalpin, there's one called Binny's Well, or Binny's Lookout.
What it was called.
And a lot of these names just were applied and then they stuck later on. And you can actually see signposts in some of these places even now. There's Reedy Well, Limestone Well, 2 wells, Hawk's Nest was another one. I think that was one of their overnight stopping places at Hawk's Nest. So yeah, that's probably about there. Mount Monster. Well, might have been the other way around. Monster Mount, actually. You may have heard of that. And so on until it got down to more places where there actually were people who had set up settlements. One of those was at Wimmera, which there is a place called that on the highway, but was actually a station further south of that. And
But was that surveyed before, or did they just go where they thought was the best on the first trip?
No, it wasn't surveyed before. None of this area was effectively surveyed at this time. And but this survey party that went out about the same time that Tolma left Adelaide, they were doing an official survey as they found a suitable route. So all of that would have been recorded. But any of the survey that they did do some over the border, but any of that would have been unofficial. They were South Australian surveys. So
Well, then just which way did those from South Australia go to Mount Alexander to be miners?
well, this is an interesting question because better, worse,
No better. How about
better,
Yes. Yes.
good, better, best? Is that what we used to say?
Absolutely.
Rubbish. It's a very good question because some of the diggers just found their own way there,
Yeah.
just overlay. And when I say that they were coming across land that nobody, it's may have appeared that nobody had been there before. In actual fact, some of the South Australians going to the Victorian diggings just found their own route across. Initially, though, and I fail to understand this, but initially some of the routes that diggers took actually went down here
That followed the Chinese route.
and across. Because you had road
That's right.
here. And they may well follow the Chinese routes over to the Victorian diggings. You're all familiar with what Elon's talking about? The Chinese. When Victoria imposed a landing tax on Chinese entering Victoria, it was being done for two reasons: to limit the number of Chinese coming in, and also to raise money Chinese coming in. So they imposed a sort of an entry tax or a landing tax in Melbourne, the ships that docked in Melbourne. So what they did is that the ships brought the Chinese to Rome, South Australia, and they disembarked there, and then they went overland to the Victorian diggings. Now, the route they went, I think,
Was a bit
went a bit further down. That's right. Yeah,
because it went through the ground.
it did, and some of the roads between the Western Highway right down to places like Casterton or Hamilton or further over, you actually cross the old Adelaide road through there.
Another thing, Harvey, is that the Aboriginals had tracks.
Yes.
It's recorded in Sturt's diary, not so much for South Australia, but New South Wales. They were well-established tracks.
Yes. Yeah. So that would have given them something to work on as well. So this might have been the initial way that they went, but I think they would have realised fairly quickly that it's a long way around. Why not just go more direct? There was always the issue, though, of the long desert, because if you were with a party of people travelling to Victoria, you would need to be prepared. You'd need to have clear water and so on. And you wouldn't want to be carting too much equipment with you either, making a trip like that. Because some of them would have had carts, some of them had horses, and a lot of them just to the diggings as well. So, so they might have crossed some of the same tracks in doing all this. Okay, so Wimmera, Keith, Watertown. So after 2 or 3 of the escorts had been run, they realised that Watertown, or then was called Scott's Woolshed. But you know Watertown well. So there is a Scott Street in Watertown and a Woolshed Street and a Woolshed Hotel as well. And so this was Scott's Woolshed, but later became Watertown. And that was one of the staging places. And the South Australian government actually set up police prisons based at Scott's Woolshed or Watertown. Now, remnants of, I don't know whether it was actually the original police station, but remnants of the early police station still exist
Yeah, I shop
at the
bakery.
Morning Loaf Bakery, yes. So if you go into the Morning Loaf Bakery and then walk around inside, here's part of the old police station in the building. And the toilets at the back are the old cells. So they've remained, which is good. Bit of history there. Okay, so, oh, sorry, before we leave that, any questions about any of that?
Was there any gold discovered in South Australia?
There was. Certainly, once some of the finds in New South Wales and Victoria occurred, you can imagine the South Australian government was anxious for them to find gold in South Australia. And they did find a little bit down here in this area. I'm trying to think of the name. What's that place called? Mount something or other. Mount, sort of in the middle of the Fleury, basically, the Fleury Peninsula. Trying to think of the name. There was a small find there, and it gave them some hope, but I think they realised it just wasn't of sufficient quantity to justify.
No, they found more copper.
Eventually, they found more copper, especially up at Burra.
And
Yes, yeah.
But there was a little bit of copper on, you can see some bits of remnants on the way into Adelaide along the freeway.
Oh, yes,
there's
yes.
a mine there, and that also mined pyrites.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's interesting, I've just been reading some family history, and in the 1860s, these relatives of mine settled in the Barossa Valley, and they were given the right to their land, to the minerals under it, and to the waterways, and they mined tin and copper. That's then already. And I just found it fascinating, that's all. And because some of the family had come across to Mount Alexander.
Yes, yeah. And it's kind of perhaps a slight digression, but in Victoria, after the initial gold rushes, they actually found tin in a lot of the gold bearing areas as well. And as the gold gradually petered out, some of the miners turned their attention to tin. Well, this is a problem with gold as well, but there's one really big issue with tin mining at the time. Water and the environmental effects of tin mining, the way they did it then, were absolutely devastating, because it just completely wrecked whole areas, because they used high water pressure to break the through the rock, and mind you, gold was pretty unfriendly to the environment too. I'm digressing. There is a book I read a few years ago called Sludge. You write a book about sludge. It was all the tailings from the gold mines that were just left covering the countryside in the area around that north central area in Bendigo and Castle. So, and some of that land was completely unusable for decades. Later on, they tried to rehabilitate it. Probably succeeded to a degree. Any other comments? Okay. Now, just bear in mind that this map is on a completely different scale to the other one. And I've only included part of Victoria here, but I think you should know, you should be able to pick the general locations anyway. So following the Western Highway down here, probably should have put that in double lines, but anyway. Animate Road out here, Warwickville, and then so on through Bendigo. And very roughly, the route of the Wimmera River there. Okay, so leaving Scott's woolshed, generally speaking, the Escort would head towards Carnarvon, and I think later on that was usual, but didn't occur all the time because there was one route that they developed that broke away from the highway and came down through here. But the more usual route appeared to be come through Carnarvon existed, of course, and through Carnarvon, and then did a loop around Mount Elgin. Now, Mount Elgin is not a mountain in the normal sense of the word, but if you know the Lawlike Ranges between Mill and Carnarvon, Mount Elgin is just to the east of the Lawlike Ranges. So if we do a loop around there, then where are we? Okay, down through the little desert. In this direction. Yeah. They cross the river at roughly Colcat. But I've been trying to determine exactly where the crossing was, and I haven't succeeded yet. My suspicion is it's a little bit to the north of where the Polcannon Bridge is. So they cross the river there and then head fairly directly towards Horsham. And this location here on the highway, of course, is where that gold Escort marker is just at the highway. I've got a picture of a couple of these things. I'll pass around at the moment. And I discovered, some of you may be aware of this. So just to the west of Nadavac, in Nadavac, there's a road that goes north in this direction. Doesn't go right up into the desert. It's called the Arapalis Grass Flat Road, or I think it's also called the Mitre Grass Flat Road. And of course, this is where some of the fires actually started, just in here, within the grass flat and the fires. So just is a cap that marks the gold Escort coming through. But with any of the gold Escort route, we need to bear in mind that it probably didn't follow the exact route very often. There were probably slight variations that occurred frequently, and sometimes they were forced to vary the route anyway because the conditions were just too bad. And for example, where they crossed here at Polcannon, right in here, is a series of swamps. And if those swamps, if the river was high and been wet, and those swamps were full, they would have had to find their way in between or around or whatever where the swamps were. Okay, so before we go too far that way, and this route here, I think was used several times, breaks up the highway between the border and Lillibon. And that was actually called, that was called the Third Chain Road, simply the Third Chain Road. And that part of it used to be a Cobbett Cove route as well. The coaches later on. Okay, so you see any problems that might develop for the Escort so far before we get to bush?
What about the bushranger up in the Mount Bradley? Did
Okay.
he bother this at all?
I think I'll put that on the sheet. Yeah, later on, we'll deal with the bushranger issue later.
Okay.
Because that's often a question that's asked. Any other apparent?
Water.
Okay, through the little desert, availability of water would be a particular issue.
And the desert itself, I suppose, is an issue.
Yes. I mean, you will have the little desert in places that's really sand, quite deep sand. And imagine horses pulling a cart through some of that sand. I don't know how they did it, but especially if it was loaded with gold on the way back. But they seem to be able to vary their route enough so that they could get around the worst. And it was a seasonal thing. Obviously, the sand of the desert's going to be worse in summer because it just becomes all loose. It might be down a little bit better during winter. I think a few times they actually took the route around Mill and came more directly down that way as well. But I think that would have been the exception rather than the rule. And of course, in other parts of the route, they did the same thing. They varied it to suit the conditions. Okay, so it's probably a good point to pass these around. I've got a copies of each of these. Sorry about the way it's done because I'm not. One's the other way. Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, I see.
I'm not a photo expert.
That's the view.
So one of those is the historical marker at the highway. One is the Wimmera River at Polkemmet Bridge. And then on the other sheet there's a more general picture of the can here on the grass slope road. And then a close up of the can as well. Might be able to read it.
The ground, that one's upside down. This is that one. Oh, it is. Yes. Is this one?
That's the can here on the line across the road.
This is
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Just trying to capture the wording.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know, we're against the, should say they live very about those guys. It's a very good thing. It's really pretty nice.
That's not half my mind.
That was upside down.
That's due to my expertise. Or like it, I should say. So while they're still going around, I'll just get down for we'll just break for a few minutes. What would be the issues crossing the Wimmera River? There's no ferry.
The height of the river, I suppose.
What the height of the river was at any particular time. Originally I thought the crossing was at Ellis Crossing, which is a bit further up here towards the building, and that's actually a natural ford. There's a bridge there now, but it was a natural ford. But from what I've read, that doesn't appear to be the case. It seems to be a bit further south. So often there would be water in the river, and at times the water would be quite high.
Or how did they go?
Okay, any inspirational thoughts?
But they swim the horses,
They swim the horses, yes.
but they'd have that cart to get across. They would be,
Yeah.
almost have to have a boat.
Well, they created a boat out of the cart. So what they used to do is they'd run a tub under the bottom of the boat and floated the cart, sorry, and floated across. May not work every time, but it did work sometimes. And there were times when they had some really bad situations where they nearly lost the cart, and if the cart was going to be too heavy with the gold in it, now you might think 300 bags of gold sitting in a cart doesn't weigh that much. Just remember how much gold weighs. So what they would sometimes do is that they'd load the gold onto the troopers' horses, and they would get across, and then they'd have to get the cart across separately. And there was probably a number of times I had to do that as well.
Sounded like hard work.
Oh,
It sounds like they've had a few days in one spot.
well, the original estimate it would take 10 days was probably around about right if everything went right. But I'm sure there would have been some times when they got holed up in one spot for a couple of days, particularly in the worst of winter.
Approximately how many carriages, horses and manpower went on each of these convoys?
Well, there was only one cart.
Only one.
Only one cart, yes, but that was pulled by probably 4 horses, and they each of the troopers, which would
And
be,
the provisions for the others?
yes, and they'd have to carry all their supplies and provisions as well. You'd have 11 or 12 mounted troopers as well, and they excuse me. Initially, they probably took some spare horses with them also. So
But they have to have tents and everything.
yeah, they did. Yeah.
They just have saddlebags, wouldn't they? Just to lie on the ground.
No, they erected tents to sleep in.
Yeah, but the tents would be pretty basic.
They would be very basic, and there would have been times when they would have just slept under the stars.
If it's not right.
If it's not right. Sometimes in when the conditions were really wet and pretty hard to put up with, but they actually got wet through and were like that for days. And then it doesn't seem very pleasant. So, yeah.
At least getting overtime for this.
I was
Trying to extend the budget.
No, that's a good question. They probably got paid more than your typical policeman in Adelaide.
You'd like to think so.
Okay. Look, perhaps we'll break there for 5 minutes. If anyone wants to grab a quick cuppa, the makings are in there.
Everything's in there, is it?
I think everything's there. Then we'll come back, finish this off, and then we'll look at the other things to cover.
Stand up anyway, make my legs work.
Yes, a little bit in Horsham in 1952, because Horsham, I don't think another one.
Yes, yeah.
That would have been a bit of a relief to come across.
Stopping it in the other places.
I don't know if there's any place up there. Probably is.
I found it before that. or-
Well,
I remember the dates to do. Ronnie was township. Still beginning about 81.
Oh,
I did that one.
They would have had, people on the roads.
They did, yes. Yeah, forgetting the big desert up here and
You see anything?
the
Nancy?
little,
Probably looking at me, but I can't see it.
all through here, the squatting ones. And some of those are pretty large holdings.
I would have been along on grass for sheep at that time.
Yes.
I don't know whether it's the grass. What about the feed for the horses or something down there? Was they carrying it as well?
They had to carry feed, at least the South Australian section, because there was no guarantee of feed there. But as the stopping points became more developed, they probably was to do with it.
You want to be an Easter egg? Many years ago, I was basketball.
Oh, did you?
Many years ago.
And
I was so interested to read it. They said they went.
I won a Easter egg basket, and 1 year I won a turkey.
But they were Blackfoot.
And I had a
And so
very
they
good number.
didn't go on it.
I had some bakery, and you cooked it for.
some of the more enterprising people realised there was more money to be made meeting the needs of the miners rather than trying to find them. And some of them were probably a bit unscrupulous.
Yeah.
Also do with fundraising.
It's inconceivable that you'd set out on such a journey now. But in that era of time, it was important, you know, you
Their fundraising
didn't
was
work, you don't
cookies out.
And it was the time of exploration.
Yes, because you're always
Yeah.
going straight to Australia. So instead of straight, yes, you actually get something for your money. Because you can go home and make
Because I'd rather able to sit on the roof of their house and watch the train come down from Bali to Auckland.
Yeah, all set.
What do
those spots?
Yes.
What is it again?
And then of course, later on.
Yeah, you put $5.
Five, three for
Oh,
We got Peninsula.
Yes. Yeah, Cadena.
Oh, I see. I didn't really chew.
Yeah. It is This is terrifying, interesting. Very, very interesting. Sorry, on farming. You lived in Manham.
I did, yeah, for 6 years, 7 years. Beautiful place.
Used to go to Manham sometimes to, I don't know, just different way of going over the road. Because I lived in Barraclough.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We've been to Violet Glass. Yeah, they have races there, don't they?
Oh, yes, yes. We used to watch the cars going to the races when we were in school. Yes. These days, Barraclough, the population almost doubled, I think.
So it was interesting how some places develop an event. And the one I often think of is the hanging rock races.
Yeah.
They still have races at hanging rock.
Yeah.
But it's quite famous. They must have thought I needed this. A sugar hit. I see there's
You got the hundreds and thousands of them. It's like, it's, I don't know what they're thinking now.
you still calling that, but you know,
Yeah.
hundreds of things.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's still hundreds and thousands.
Oh,
And now you're really retired. Yes.
This is sounding like a long drawn out saga, this trip. I'm getting tired thinking about it.
and all the obstacles that we don't see today.
You wouldn't want the kids up in the back seat saying, "Holy man."
Oh,
What
I've got a neighbour that works at the stall mine,
gold mine now.
Oh,
But he jumps in a very modern car and destroys the village.
and all the equipment's just so spot on and oh, isn't it? We went down this gold mine once when they had an open day, just happened to strike it right. And yeah, it was so interesting. And the first lights of store were down the bottom of the mine.
All right.
Because of all the traffic that's down there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think what we have to realise about this is that they must have had amazing resilience.
Oh,
Oh, yes. But in everything they did.
life. Yes.
But I mean, just thinking of the weather and everything for these people all out in the open for 10 days. And like sometimes it would be a shocking 10 days.
And it was hot. And then the next one would be pouring rain and
Or freezing winds. And, yeah.
I mean, we stand that in something for about 20 minutes and go, oh, it was shocking day.
let's go into the air conditioning. Oh,
Okay. Just,
And we got the circulation.
I'll have to drink this to go.
Yeah, it will be hot, sorry. I could put a bit of water.
You can just take a break. Six and take a sip.
What time are you 15? What time are you 15?
Oh, yes. And we used to go across to Auburn in the 1960s, 7-8 drought. You could walk across the river in a lot of places up there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I went on married, and they couldn't. Oh, did they get to Morgan? I'm not sure that they did because they along somewhere. It was there wasn't enough water.
Yeah.
To take the
Very
through.
through.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of these yours, we ended up with two now.
Yes, I think I must have not.
They're just football.
We'll ring the bell.
Yeah.
It's not too challenged.
Okay, well, we'll keep going. And feel free to keep drinking and eating, etc.
Can I help you?
It's nice, man.
You just drink nothing.
I'll get to the thing if you like.
Okay, so we've got to push. There wouldn't have been much abortion at the time, of course, because there was a second. I should say it was a bit of contact with other people there. So essentially, and please bear in mind that the putting the route in can only be an accident because the map just doesn't give us the luxury of total accuracy. But essentially, the route came across. They did they also made contacts in the squatting runs too, and so he was asking before about squatting runs, because you get some big squatting runs right down through this area here. I should use another colour, but in here would be a squatting run I'm sure you'd be familiar with.
Wilson.
I think the Wilson one was further out, the Vectus run. And here they're going to encounter the long run on.
Yes.
Yeah. So they did call on those places some of the time. I don't know whether they made a regular thing of it or not. And then they actually followed the river. They might seem as if they're going out of their way a little bit, but they had to come down because this is actually further south, believe it or not. So roughly through where the bar is now, and they follow through here to the north of the Pyrenees, represented by this here. Probably dip down towards Avoca and more or less directly across there to Mount Alexander. And they would have had at least two other rivers to cross there, which I haven't put in. You would have had the, which one is it? The Avon or the Richardson? It's the same system, don't you?
Richardson, isn't it? And they're both available.
Sorry, three rivers, yes. So the Avon Richardson here, the Avoca River a bit further, well, actually not all that much further, about here. And over here would be, this is testing your geography. It's a bigger river than the Avoca or the Avon.
Oh, you mean the one that goes to Bridgewater?
Yes, that's it. I emphasise that one because that may have required another big river crossing as well. Because, I mean, the Loddon is at least as big as the Wimmera in terms of its being a river system. And it might have been quite high at times as well. So they would have had those to cross as well. And eventually to Mount Alexander itself. So just to be clear, the Mount Alexander goldfields are further east than Maine, and the Calder Freeway runs down between the two. Reasonably close to Mount Alexander, because the Maine's a bit further away this way. But sometimes when historians are talking about the diggings, they sort of run them all together a little bit, which they probably weren't really. But what did happen as far as the diggers were concerned is that they tended to move from one to the other as their fortunes fluctuated. So there was a lot of, to use another colour, there was a lot of to and fro movement, like this between the different diggings. And then later, some digging did start to develop along parts of the route further this way through the Pyrenees. The Sonata finds probably didn't contribute much to the gold escort, but some of these places did. And between Mount Alexander and Bendigo, there are all these diggings that they gave specific names to. Some of them are imagining names too.
Aren't some of them suburbs of Bendigo these days?
Some of them would be. I mean, the case in point is Eaglehawk, Sailor's Gully. I think close at the end of Alexander was Friars Gully, and all these names, some of which have just got built into the local sort of seen, really. And I should have actually mentioned right at the start is that one of my principal sources for a lot of this is Les Blake's Golden Escort, which has got a lot of drawings of diggers. It's got the various routes taken by the Gold Escort, and it's got a lot of very detailed information about how the escort worked and descriptions of most of the actual trips that were taken over the whole 18 escorts that were carried out. That's an invaluable source. Okay, so if we get back to our notes. Sorry, before we move on, any questions about this Victorian part of it?
There's another part here somewhere, Roses, yeah. But I don't think it's just the old Adelaide Road,
It is.
having anything to do with the Golden School.
Yes, no, you're right. If you come off the highway and you actually go through the Roses Gap Road, which connects, we can get this right, we're talking about up here again. That Roses Gap Road connects with the Horse Gap Road, or what we call the Champions. But you know the one I mean, it goes out through the Harvey, those places. So that Roses Gap Road connects up with that. But you're right, roughly in the middle of that is a sign for the old Adelaide Road.
Oh, yes, there is.
And it's marked on other roads going across it as well.
Marked on the road down to Cavendish.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Okay. So, how was the gold collected? So, looking at item 5 now, number 5, how was the gold collected? So, initially, in the first 2 or 3 trips that were made over to Mount Alexander, essentially they just advertised they were there. Sometimes they went around canvassing, especially amongst the South Australian diggers, to get them to put the gold there rather than sending it to Melbourne or disposing of it locally. It probably sounds a little bit disorganised, but it did seem to work. It just took a bit of time, that was all. And people had to get the idea that this was available to them, and if you're a South Australian, you should be encouraged to send your gold to Adelaide. So there was a little bit of, what would you call it, loyalty, I suppose, sort of being appealed to there as well. Especially during the later part of 1852, they found there was value in gold agents, that's Australian gold agents, on the Victorian fields. Now, there were already agents for the Melbourne gold companies who resided on the diggings, and their job was to acquire as much gold as they could to send through them. It's a little bit like something shame. Agents want to sell their stock through them because they get commission out. And, it's a little bit like that. So the South Australian government actually established at least 2, and there would have been more, gold agents on the Bendigo Mount Alexander goldfields. So that speeded up the process. So instead of waiting till the escort arrived the next time, when they would have to go appealing for people to put their gold with them, the agents in between time could acquire the gold from the diggings. and hold it in storage until such time as the Escort returned to pick up the next consignment. And when you think about it, it was a reasonably generous gesture on the part of the Victorian government to allow that to happen. Because effectively those gold agents were setting up in competition to Victorian gold agents. But you know, they seem to think that they agreed with that position anyway. And that's what actually happened. So they then used the gold agent system right through to the later part of 1853, when it was becoming apparent that the gold was declining and that the Escort was becoming a little more threatened, I suppose, as a service. So that's how they collected the gold, and they got it from that whole area. So the agents had to do a bit of work in between times, so they would arrange for consignments from Castlemaine and Bendigo and other places. It wasn't just Mount Alexander they got gold from. It may mean, though, once the Escort has arrived, the agents have got to get the gold down to Mount Alexander to pick up the Escort and from anywhere else nearby as well. It just wasn't practical for the Escort to go around to all these areas collecting gold on the way. So they were relying on the agents to do it. So what actually happened with all this? What process was used for the collection, reporting to the diggers? So as far as the gold to Adelaide was concerned, of course, the diggers would consign their gold, usually in, I think they used canvas bags. Does that sound about right? They had to be bags that were reasonably solid. And we want to be open weave bags because you don't want to get gold dust drifting out through the bags. So they'd have to be reasonably solid. But that was how they collected it. It was all in bags. And that would have to be recorded as it was consigned to the Escort. So the records would have to be fairly accurate. And then what happened is that when the gold went to Adelaide, all the records, of course, would go with it. The gold would be consigned to a bank. So at the time, there were 3 or 4 main banks in Adelaide. You could nominate which bank you wanted your receipts to go to. And the gold was actually melted down into so Adelaide or South Australian government actually set up an assay office in Adelaide, and on receiving the gold, it was actually turned into bullion there, and that would be credited to the diggers who had consigned that gold to them. Now, there probably would be costs for them to pay when it got there, but initially they still thought it was worthwhile. So that's how it was done. Part of probably assumed that the South Australian diggers would eventually return to South Australia and to Adelaide, and then their gold would be usable to them, or the value of the gold would be usable to them. To get them by on the goldfields, there were gold buyers on the goldfields they could consign gold to as well for immediate payment. And that was probably their way of paying for their immediate requirements and things like that. Mind you, they didn't get as much on the actual fields themselves. Now, does that make sense, that explanation about it's one thing sending gold does to Adelaide, but what actually happens when it hits it, that was the big question. So they did have that worked out, and that was all part of Tom's original proposal. But it could only work if they got the cooperation, not just of the government, but of the banks as well. But the banks were in dire straits one stage, so they were very, very happy to get all this extra gold. So how difficult was the journey? We've essentially talked about this with our red maps and so on. Were the particular difficulties to be dealt with in the Wimmera, example, the little desert of the Wimmera River, when we talked about those. The gold escort parties generally were relieved on the outward journey to Mount Alexander once they got to Bordertown or Scott's bullshit. Because generally speaking, the travel became easier because when we're talking geographically, you've got sort of little desert here, big desert here, you've got the long desert over here, you've also got valley country up here. So you have this heavier country that flows down through here, except for the little desert, of course, where the going was a lot easier pulling the cart because the ground was more solid and the going was a lot easier, except when it got really wet because they weren't properly formed up roads, they were just tracks. So it was probably pretty hard going in the wet as well. And that often was the case through this area over here that might occur. Okay, the question of bushrangers. Any thoughts?
Well, I haven't heard much. All I heard is that, yes, there was a bushranger in Mount Athletes, and yes, that bushranger did try and attack a couple of the Escort.
Yeah. And I heard the same story just yesterday. And to be truthful, there is no record of any bushranger attacks on the gold escort between Adelaide and Alexander. I would have thought this book
It would have told you.
would have mentioned that. It's interesting though. Why weren't there attempts at raiding the gold escort? Apparently, according to Blake, once or twice crossing this area through here, where there were well-known bushranging gangs, and apparently one story he mentions is that a group of bushrangers actually rode into their camp at night and saw how heavily armed they were and decided that's what it sounded like. Because, I mean, they were reasonably heavily armed. Each of the troopers would have a carbine of some kind. Some of the officers would have pistols as well. So unless you were a very heavily armed bushranging gang, it was a bit of a risk. But having said that, the escort from Bendigo or Mount Alexander to Melbourne was held up a number of times. And can anyone suggest any reasons for that?
The terrain made it easy.
Well, possibly because there were certain sort of clear areas and ranges and that they had to go through. I mean, Bendigo and Melbourne as well, which would have perhaps encouraged
They have as much escort as many people.
It was about the same.
They might have had better hiding places.
Well, that could be part of it. the only obvious hiding place of the shrangers it would be the trees. I mean, probably could be plenty of places along there that bushrangers could have holed out. But we know for a fact that this area up through here and right up to here was recruited by a lot of bushrangers at different times. Trying to think of particular names. But I'll give you
Do we know the name of the bushranger?
I don't. I mean, I think there is some truth in that there was a bushranger at a rabbit, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence that he actually held up the escort that I can see. I mean, it wouldn't be too far away.
The other issue is he would have to do something with the gold dust or gold nuggets or whatever they were that he found. And the likelihood of him going to either Adelaide or Melbourne and being able to fence them is pretty would have made it a bit less.
Yes, yeah. We made it more difficult. I mean, even the little settlement portion wouldn't have been able to help him out at all. There'd be no assay officer or place to receive gold at all there.
Whereas the ones going to Melbourne, well, they had Melbourne to go to, you know.
Yes.
And I guess they could divert through Ballarat and pretend they got it from Ballarat.
I'm sure there's some ways they could have done it. And we need to bear in mind too that fields developed down here as well. You know, we're talking about clunes and those sorts of places. So you know, it was all a little bit closer and possibly more easy for bushrangers to tackle. So, and the other thing about the Bendigo run was that it was much more free, so there was a lot more opportunity for bushrangers to do. But having said all that, the biggest bushranger exploits were in New South Wales. Ben Gardner's gang, Ben Hall, the Wimmera robbery, which is probably one of the most famous. But that was a common cocoa that was held up, but it was carrying gold. So, yeah. Okay, so
When was Dan Morgan's time? Was he around during this
I
period?
think it was just a little bit later. You're familiar with Dan Morgan, Mad Dan, what do they call him? Mad Dog Morgan. That's right.
Yeah, that's
He was an absolutely notorious bushranger, and not all of it, but some of his time was spent in this area. But I think we're talking about early 1860s. Once we get to that, there was a big squatting run out north of Canova called Cove Station, and Dan Morgan held it up twice, including injuring one of the owners at one stage by shooting them. Yes, I think he was a pretty wild character. And Bill's Gully, does that mean anything? So Bill's Gully is a tiny little place. So I'll put this on the map. It's about here, and that's a sealed road down there, but runs into the desert. Bill's Gully, which is, there's been a hole there from the late 1800s and so on, so it was a bit of a settlement. But it's got its name from Dan Morgan, because his alternative name was Bill the Spaniard. So it was believed he hid away at Bill's Gully for a time, and he got the name of Bill's Gully. But his notoriety went far beyond that. But I think he was eventually killed in running with the police, if I remember right.
Things that she had. Yeah, and it was closer to a Chuka or something, I think.
It was up that way. So
Yeah, and didn't he out from England there was that place, didn't he hide up in there sometimes?
yes, and I was trying to think of the place.
Gower is close to it.
Yeah, yes. I think you're right. And there is a little mountain range there too, that would have been an ideal hiding place. Okay, so did the gold escort fulfill the original objectives for setting it up in the first place? So I've run off for you a page of statistics. I'll help explain this. And provide other information as well. It's probably going to be a bit hard to absorb all of this just in a few minutes. And we might, when you take it away, you might have a better look at it. But it's a summary of all 18 gold escorts from early 1852 to December 1853. So you've got departure dates from Adelaide when they arrive in Mount Alexander and return dates as well. One of the things that happened initially, because they didn't have the collection so organised in the first few escorts, or they had to stay longer at Mount Alexander because it took them longer to go. If you look at something like Escort 11 in 1853, it arrives in Mount Alexander on the 13th of April and departs on the 17th. Only 4 days. So the much more organised gold agent system meant that they didn't have to spend a lot of time. Initially, they would have had to spend a week, 10 days or even more to collect the gold. But they sort of got down to a more organised system.
Was one that July, August, it was 28 days.
Yes.
Return.
That the weather was probably good.
Oh,
Well,
that'd be a
end
long
of
month.
winter, it's spring now.
Yeah.
Yes. Look, it was probably some explanation like that. And Blake would have talked about that in detail as to why that actually happened.
And they took a lot of gold into.
So when you look at, well, certainly the parcels of gold is significant, because that effectively represents the differing amounts that the diggers are putting in. And although it's talking about parcels rather than necessarily number of diggers, it perhaps gives you an indication that the number of diggers contributing did increase through the latter part of 1852.
So would you think that each digger had one parcel?
No, that could be any number of parcels. And that's why you can't totally correlate the two. But I think it would have been an increased number. Then it's got the weight of gold and the value in pounds. So you can see the trends. the amount consigned from the second Escort right through to November 1852, the amounts just increased. So you're talking about substantial amounts. And then from the very end of 1852 going into 1853, see how the amounts started to decline and decline considerably right through that period. September was a bit of a spike again, September 1853, but after that it fell away. So that was probably one or two obvious explanations. Why did the consignment amount fall away? Any thoughts?
Well, that's when the gold started to come online. Alluvial gold, especially.
Yes, especially the alluvial gold. So it was getting harder and harder for miners to find surface gold. And I don't mean just picking it up off the surface, I mean just digging shallow amounts. And they were having to resort more and more to digging shafts. But there was another reason as well.
Would there be more people coming in during that time, like and going, some of the stuff going to Melbourne, some selling their own and whatever on the gold fields, like it might not all necessarily be going to go back.
Yes, yeah, and that's part of it. That's the other part of it. The number of diggers on the gold fields wouldn't have perhaps declined much because diggers just kept coming from everywhere.
Yeah, that's not thinking.
So Mount Alexander had something like 20,000 people on the diggings at any one time, on and on. The number of diggers on the different fields sort of waxed and waned a lot. They'd hear about a better strike somewhere else, so they'd move, and then they'd come back, and it was a bit of it was very floating sort of populistic. But yes, the other main thing was that more and more were turning to just using the Victorian escorts. Because what the Victorian government did was they started to set a higher price. And one thing the South Australian government did was to implement a higher cartage fee for the Escort, which was probably a mistake. When you think about it, it still might have represented a slightly better price than Melbourne, but the bigger difference was bringing down, and it just wasn't as it just wasn't worth as much to send it to Adelaide. So more and more, even from South Australian diggers, was sent to Melbourne. So it comes to the last question: why did it conclude at the end of 1853? I mean, you look at these figures and you can see some obvious reasons. Gold was getting harder to find. The consignment through the gold escort to Adelaide was just getting less and less. So right through, with one or two exceptions, in the latter part of 1853, the figures are way down. They moved that to.
Well, it wouldn't justify all the expenses in there.
And it was probably starting to get more expensive as well. Because one thing I perhaps should have mentioned a little bit more of was that as they got the whole thing a bit more organised, they had staging stations along the way for horses. So these would be stopover ports for them and resting places for horses. But it got to the point fairly quickly where they actually held horses at those different staging stations so they could get completely fresh horses to continue on the next part of the route through. So the costs probably did increase as well. And what was happening in what was happening in Adelaide is that the government was debating whether there were more efficient ways of getting gold to Adelaide. So one way they were exploring, which I don't know whether they actually implemented prior to the end of 1853, was that they get the gold sent to Melbourne and then take it by ship to Adelaide. And that would be a more efficient way of doing it. And they could take a lot more gold than anyone. Anyone can sign it. Then I think they did eventually do it, but I'm not sure whether that's been put in place before this finished. So anyway, those figures tell a lot of the story, really, how the gold export worked. You'll notice that Torma headed the first three, and then there were a number of other senior officers, some whose names recur several times. And Torma directed from the sidelines, more or less. I think by 1853, he may not have even been commissioner of police. I think because he had a few arguments with superiors, with officers under him and so on. He did create a bit of unrest within the police force. And at one stage, he was actually demoted because they felt that just so much friction being created in the force. When I say demoted, I think what they did was they said they've done away with this position. That's what they do this.
It's redundant.
Yes, that's
Isn't there a bridge named after him? The Tolma Bridge.
that's
Tolma
good.
Bridge? I think it's Watertown.
Tolma.
Yeah,
Tolma,
yeah.
Watertown.
Yeah,
That's
because
right.
there's a park as well. I think it's the.
It's the overpass.
Yes,
Yes, doesn't go over
The Tolma.
time over overpass, yes. And I always thought that the rest area at the border used to be called the Tolma rest area as well, but it's not called that now. I don't know why. It's just called the service rest area. But there may be a plaque to Tolma at that rest area. I'm just trying to remember. So, I mean, he was recognised for what he did. There's no doubt that there would have been a lot of, the worthy citizens of Adelaide who would have owed Tolma a debt, or basically saving their bank, saving the economy, keeping Adelaide solvent, I suppose, or South Australia in general, solvent.
But it really only became solvent once Broken Hill started.
Yeah, I won't argue that one,
But
but
because the reason is they had the stock exchange for Broken Hill in Adelaide,
yes,
and that brought money in, and until then they really struggled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the impact of this was the immediate.
This was immediate, yeah.
Yes, and if
They always had their money problems like that until the stock exchange for Broken Hill was established there, BHP.
yes, yeah. But there's no doubt that this idea of Tolma's did
Helped them.
There's certainly a big idea.
well.
Hey, it opened up the countryside, didn't it?
When people say, I've got an idea, this was one big idea.
The fact that he managed to convince the South Australian government that it was worth trying was probably a big deal.
And he was right. It was worth trying.
Yeah.
And it did go all.
So, I mean, I think we could say it was a success. It's reasons for being just eventually became less appropriate, I guess. And I mean, it reflected the fortunes on the goldfields to a degree as well. Although the gold rush, as we think of them, did go through to the early 1860s. Just in slightly different ways. Okay, so are there any last minute questions or comments?
It's really interesting. Very interesting.
Well, I'm hoping that piqued your interest.
Okay.
But it is fascinating and it's quite a significant part of our history, even Wimmera history. Okay, well, thanks everyone, and not sure what your next session is, but
It'll be a surprise.
it won't be me. But I don't know what's lined up for the next session. So.
Well, thanks very much.
Thanks very much. And, keep coming to local history.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering what I was going to do with this one. Oh, thank you very much. It's great. Great, isn't it?
Yes. I better watch them. I'll talk about it. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Oh, good on you.
I'll bring.
I'm going to do
You've done well.
Yes, please stop the video.
Stop the video. I can go in stream. Immediately viewable. Yeah, go in.